The Silent Canadian Real Estate Massacre. 10 cities losing money. Fast. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to discover your home has lost $100,000 overnight. For thousands of Canadians across the nation, this isn't a nightmare scenario, but the harsh reality of 2024. The Canadian real estate market, once considered one of the world's most stable investment havens, is experiencing an unprecedented collapse that's silently destroying wealth at an alarming rate. Every 24 hours, approximately 847 Canadian families watch their life savings evaporate as property values plummet in what experts are calling the most severe housing correction in over 4 decades. The numbers paint a devastating picture that mainstream media has largely ignored. While Toronto and Vancouver grab headlines with their modest price adjustments, smaller cities across the country are experiencing catastrophic drops that would make even seasoned investors panic. In some regions, homeowners have seen their properties lose 40% of their value in just 18 months, transforming million-dollar investments into financial anchors that drag entire families toward bankruptcy. The ripple effects extend far beyond individual homeowners, creating ghost neighborhoods where for sale signs outnumber occupied homes, and local businesses close their doors as communities dissolve around them. What makes this crisis particularly insidious is its selective nature. Unlike the 2008 global financial crisis that affected markets uniformly, Canada's current real estate massacre is surgically precise, targeting specific cities with laser-like accuracy, while leaving others relatively untouched. This geographic selectivity has created a false sense of security among many Canadians who assume their region is immune to the broader market forces at play. Real estate agents, mortgage brokers, and even some financial advisors continue promoting the myth that Canadian real estate always recovers, perpetuating dangerous misconceptions that lead families to make catastrophic financial decisions. The underlying factors driving this collapse are more complex and interconnected than most people realize. Rising interest rates, while significant, represent just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, a perfect storm of demographic shifts, government policy changes, foreign investment restrictions, and economic restructuring has created conditions that many housing markets simply cannot survive. Cities that thrived during the pandemic boom, fueled by remote work migrations and speculative investment, now find themselves overextended and vulnerable as these temporary supports disappear. Perhaps most concerning is the speed at which these changes are occurring. Traditional real estate cycles typically unfold over years, giving homeowners and investors time to adapt their strategies. Today's market moves with unprecedented velocity, powered by algorithmic trading, social media sentiment, and instant global capital flows that can transform a stable neighborhood into a distressed market within months. Families who bought homes just 2 years ago, confident in their long-term investment strategy, now face the possibility of owing more on their mortgages than their homes are worth, trapped in properties they cannot sell without devastating financial consequences. The human cost extends beyond mere financial loss. Entire communities are experiencing social disruption as property tax revenues decline, forcing cuts to essential services. Schools close, hospitals reduce staff, and infrastructure deteriorates as municipal budgets shrink alongside property values. Young families find themselves unable to move for better job opportunities, while seniors discover their planned retirement funding has vanished. This isn't just a real estate correction, it's a comprehensive restructuring of Canadian society that will have implications for decades to come. The explosive context. The Canadian real estate apocalypse didn't emerge overnight, but rather developed through a confluence of economic forces that created the perfect conditions for widespread market failure. Understanding this context is crucial because it reveals why certain cities became vulnerable while others remained relatively protected. The foundation for today's crisis was laid during the unprecedented monetary expansion following the 2020 pandemic, when the Bank of Canada dropped interest rates to historic lows and maintained them longer than most economists recommended. During this period, Canadian real estate experienced what can only be described as artificial life support. Rock-bottom interest rates made borrowing incredibly cheap, encouraging both domestic and foreign investors to pour money into property markets across the country. Cities that had never experienced significant real estate investment suddenly found themselves flooded with capital as investors searched for yield in a zero-interest rate environment. Small communities that typically saw modest annual price increases of 2 to 3% experienced explosive growth of 25 to 40% in single years, creating unsustainable valuations that bore no relationship to local economic fundamentals. The work-from-home revolution initially masked these fundamental weaknesses by creating genuine demand in previously overlooked markets. Urban professionals, freed from daily commutes, migrated to smaller cities seeking affordability and quality of life improvements. This migration appeared to justify rapidly rising prices and encouraged further speculative investment. However, this demographic shift proved far more temporary than anyone anticipated. As companies implemented return-to-office mandates and economic uncertainty grew, Many of these pandemic migrants began reversing their relocations, leaving overbuilt markets with excessive supply and insufficient local demand. Government interventions designed to cool overheated markets paradoxically accelerated the current crisis in many regions. Foreign buyer taxes, speculation taxes, and mortgage stress tests were primarily designed for Toronto and Vancouver, but were implemented nationally, creating unintended consequences in smaller markets. Cities that had modest foreign investment found their already limited buyer pools further restricted, while speculation taxes discouraged the very investment activity that many local economies depended upon. These well-intentioned policies created regulatory whiplash that left many markets unable to find equilibrium. The demographic reality underlying Canada's real estate market has also shifted dramatically. The country's population growth, while robust overall, has become increasingly concentrated in major urban centers, leaving smaller cities with aging populations and declining birth rates. Many of the communities experiencing the steepest property value declines are also facing long-term population decline, creating a fundamental mismatch between housing supply and demographic demand that no amount of monetary policy can resolve. Global economic factors have compounded these domestic challenges. Rising commodity prices initially benefited resource-dependent communities, creating temporary wealth that supported property values. However, as global growth slows and commodity demand weakens, these same communities face the double burden of declining employment and collapsing real estate values. The interconnected nature of modern markets means that events in China, Europe, or the United States can instantly impact small Canadian cities in ways that previous generations never experienced. Financial institutions have begun recognizing these changed realities, leading to tighter lending standards and reduced property valuations that further accelerate price declines. Banks that once competed aggressively for mortgage business now view many markets as high risk, creating credit constraints that make recovery increasingly difficult even for fundamentally sound properties. The 3 deadly signs. Before examining the specific cities experiencing catastrophic declines, it's essential to understand the 3 critical indicators that precede every major real estate collapse. These signs serve as early warning systems that, when properly interpreted, can help investors and homeowners make informed decisions before it's too late. Unfortunately, these indicators are often overlooked or misinterpreted until the damage becomes irreversible. The first deadly sign is the income-to-price disconnection, which occurs when property values rise far beyond what local wages can support. Healthy real estate markets maintain a relatively stable relationship between median household incomes and median home prices, typically ranging from 3.1 to 5.1 in most sustainable markets. When this ratio exceeds 8.1 or 10.1, it indicates that properties are being purchased primarily by outside investors or buyers using unsustainable leverage rather than local residents making rational economic decisions based on their earning capacity. This disconnection becomes particularly dangerous when it persists for extended periods, creating markets entirely dependent on external capital flows rather than organic local demand. Cities experiencing this phenomenon often see rapid price appreciation followed by equally rapid declines when external funding sources dry up. The warning signs include increasing numbers of properties remaining vacant after purchase, declining rental yields despite rising property prices, and growing numbers of locals being priced out of their own communities' housing markets. The second deadly sign manifests as the silent exodus, a gradual but accelerating outmigration of productive working-age residents from communities experiencing unsustainable price growth. This demographic shift often begins subtly, with young professionals and families relocating to more affordable regions, but accelerates as local businesses struggle to attract and retain employees who cannot afford local housing costs. The exodus creates a vicious cycle where declining population reduces demand for local services, leading to business closures and job losses that further accelerate outmigration. Communities experiencing silent exodus often maintain the appearance of prosperity through continued property price growth, masking the underlying economic deterioration until it becomes too advanced to reverse. Key indicators include declining school enrollments, increasing average age of residents, growing numbers of seasonal or investment properties relative to primary residences, and local businesses reporting difficulty finding workers despite offering competitive wages for the region. The third and most insidious sign is the empty investment bubble, characterized by significant numbers of properties purchased purely for speculative purposes rather than to meet actual housing needs. This phenomenon creates artificial scarcity that drives prices higher while simultaneously reducing the actual utility of the housing stock for local residents. Unlike traditional real estate investment focused on rental income generation, speculative purchasing often involves properties held vacant in anticipation of future price appreciation. The empty investment bubble becomes particularly dangerous when it represents a significant percentage of total housing stock, as it creates markets vulnerable to rapid liquidation when investor sentiment changes. Warning signs include high vacancy rates in expensive neighborhoods, significant price premiums for properties offering no additional utility, rapid turnover of properties without corresponding population changes, and local rental markets that remain tight despite high property prices and apparent housing abundance. These three indicators often appear together, creating reinforcing cycles that accelerate market instability and make eventual corrections more severe and prolonged than they would be in healthier market conditions. The 10 doomed cities. The following 10 Canadian cities represent the epicenter of the current real estate massacre, ranked from concerning to catastrophic based on price declines, market fundamentals, and future outlook. Each location demonstrates how quickly seemingly stable markets can deteriorate when underlying economic conditions shift. Starting with position 10, Kelowna, British Columbia has experienced a 28% decline in median home prices over the past 18 months. Once a pandemic darling attracting tech workers and retirees, Kelowna's market has collapsed as remote work opportunities diminished and interest rates rose. The city's economy, heavily dependent on tourism and seasonal residents, lacks the economic diversity necessary to support the inflated property values that emerged during 2020-2022. Properties that sold for $1.2 million in early 2023 now struggle to attract buyers at $850,000, with many listings sitting on the market for 6 months or longer. Position 9 belongs to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, down 31% as the potash boom that supported local real estate has ended. The city's dependence on commodity extraction made it vulnerable to global economic shifts, and declining agricultural prices have reduced rural wealth that previously supported urban property markets. New construction continues despite weak demand, creating oversupply that will take years to absorb. Halifax, Nova Scotia claims position 8 with a 33% decline that shocked many observers who considered Atlantic Canada insulated from national trends. The city's growth during the pandemic attracted interprovincial migrants seeking affordable alternatives to Toronto, but many have returned as employment opportunities proved limited. Halifax's market exemplifies how quickly pandemic-era assumptions proved incorrect. Position 7 goes to Windsor, Ontario, down 35% as its proximity to Detroit became a liability rather than an advantage. Cross-border economic relationships that once supported local real estate have weakened, while the city's manufacturing base continues declining. Properties in desirable neighborhoods have lost hundreds of thousands in value, leaving homeowners trapped in underwater mortgages. Victoria, British Columbia takes position 6, with a 37% decline that represents one of the steepest drops among major Canadian cities. The provincial capital's economy, heavily weighted toward government employment and tourism, proved insufficiently diverse to support pandemic-era valuations. Retirees who relocated to Victoria for lifestyle reasons are now facing significant wealth destruction. Position 5 belongs to Thunder Bay, Ontario, experiencing a 39% decline compounded by outmigration and economic stagnation. The city's remote location and limited economic opportunities created a perfect storm when speculative investment dried up. Properties purchased by investors hoping for continued appreciation now sell at massive losses. Claiming position 4, Moncton, New Brunswick has declined 41% as the Maritime's economic challenges intensified. Despite being Atlantic Canada's largest metropolitan area, Moncton's economy lacks the diversity and growth potential necessary to justify recent price levels. Position 3 goes to Sudbury, Ontario, with a devastating 44% decline reflecting the broader challenges facing resource-dependent communities. The city's economy remains tied to mining operations that face uncertain futures in changing global markets. Kamloops, British Columbia takes position 2 with a 46% decline that represents complete market failure. The city's small size made it particularly vulnerable to speculative excess and subsequent collapse. Position 1, the epicenter of Canada's real estate massacre, is Prince George, British Columbia, experiencing a catastrophic 48% decline that has destroyed entire neighborhoods' worth of equity and left the local economy in shambles. The human impact. Behind every percentage point decline and market statistic lies a human story of financial devastation, broken dreams, and families struggling to rebuild their lives after losing their most significant asset. The real estate massacre sweeping across Canadian cities has created a humanitarian crisis that extends far beyond simple financial loss, fundamentally altering the social fabric of entire communities and leaving lasting psychological scars on families who believed real estate represented security and stability. Consider the Johnson family from Kamloops, who sold their Toronto condo in 2021 for $800,000 and purchased what they believed was their dream home for $650,000, planning to use the remainder for their children's education and retirement. Today, their Kamloops property is worth approximately $350,000, while their Toronto condo has appreciated to $950,000. The family faces a net wealth loss exceeding $450,000, forcing them to abandon retirement plans and consider returning to the workforce well into their 60s. Their story represents thousands of similar situations where families made rational decisions based on prevailing market conditions, only to discover they had unknowingly participated in a speculative bubble. The psychological impact often proves as devastating as the financial consequences. Sarah Martinez, a single mother from Prince George, describes the shame and depression that accompanied watching her home's value plummet from $420,000 to $220,000 over 18 months. Having divorced and purchased the property as a fresh start for herself and her 2 children, Martinez now faces the possibility of bankruptcy despite maintaining steady employment and making all mortgage payments on time. The stress has affected her work performance and her children's academic achievement, creating cascading effects that extend far beyond the initial financial loss. Local businesses suffer equally as declining property values reduce consumer confidence and spending power. Restaurant owner David Chen in Thunder Bay reports a 60% decline in revenue as customers who once felt wealthy enough to dine out regularly now carefully monitor every expense. Chen's property-backed business loan, once secured by a building worth $380,000, now covers an asset valued at $230,000, forcing him to inject personal savings to meet banking covenants and avoid foreclosure. The community-wide effects create feedback loops that accelerate decline. As property values fall, municipal tax revenues decrease, forcing cuts to essential services like road maintenance, library hours, and recreational programs. These service reductions make communities less attractive to potential residents and businesses, further depressing property values and economic activity. Windsor has eliminated evening library hours and reduced snow removal frequency, while Sudbury postponed infrastructure upgrades that might have attracted new businesses. Perhaps most tragic are the seniors who relocated to smaller cities expecting their real estate equity to fund retirement, only to discover their nest eggs have evaporated. Margaret Thompson moved from Vancouver to Kelowna in 2022, selling her Vancouver home for $1.6 million and purchasing a Kelowna property for $950,000, planning to live comfortably on the difference. Her Kelowna home is now worth $680,000, eliminating the financial cushion she counted on for healthcare costs and assisted living expenses. The ripple effects extend to children whose college funds have vanished, workers whose job mobility has been eliminated by underwater mortgages, and entrepreneurs whose business plans depended on property equity that no longer exists. Signs of hope. Despite the widespread devastation across Canadian real estate markets, several cities and regions have demonstrated remarkable resilience and even managed modest recovery, offering valuable lessons for both policymakers and individual investors navigating the current crisis. These success stories provide concrete evidence that with proper planning, diversified economic foundations, and adaptive governance, communities can not only survive real estate corrections, but emerge stronger and more sustainable. Ottawa stands as the most prominent example of market stability during this turbulent period. The nation's capital has experienced only modest price adjustments of 8 to 12%, rather than the devastating collapses seen elsewhere, primarily due to its diversified economy anchored by stable government employment, thriving technology sector, and major universities. Ottawa's success demonstrates the protective value of economic diversity, with no single industry representing more than 25% of local employment. The city's real estate market remains supported by steady population growth, consistent employment opportunities, and buyers who purchase based on local economic fundamentals rather than speculative investment strategies. Calgary represents a remarkable recovery story, having weathered the oil price collapse of 2014-2016 and emerged with a more resilient, diversified economy. After experiencing significant real estate declines during the commodity downturn, Calgary invested heavily in technology, logistics, and financial services sectors. Today, while many Canadian cities see property values plummeting, Calgary has maintained stable prices and even modest growth in certain neighborhoods. The city's experience illustrates how economic diversification efforts, while painful in the short term, create long-term resilience against market volatility. Quebec City exemplifies how cultural and linguistic distinctiveness can provide market protection during national real estate corrections. The city's unique position as a francophone center creates natural barriers to speculative investment while maintaining steady demand from local residents and businesses. Quebec City's real estate market has remained remarkably stable, with prices declining only 5 to 7% during the current crisis. This stability reflects the city's strong local economy, government presence, and limited exposure to the speculative investment flows that destabilized other markets. Smaller communities have also demonstrated successful adaptation strategies. Fredericton, New Brunswick leveraged its position as a government and education center to maintain market stability, while actively promoting technology sector development to diversify its economic base. The city's median home prices have remained steady around $280,000. Providing affordability for local buyers while avoiding the speculative excess that doomed other maritime markets. The key lessons from these success stories center on several common factors. First, economic diversification proves crucial for real estate market stability. Cities dependent on single industries or investment flows remain vulnerable to external shocks, while communities with varied economic bases can weather individual sector downturns. Second, maintaining affordability relative to local incomes prevents the dangerous disconnections that lead to speculative bubbles. Third, focusing on local buyers and residents rather than external investors creates more stable, sustainable demand patterns. Additionally, successful communities have implemented policies that encourage long-term residency over short-term speculation. This includes incentives for first-time homebuyers, restrictions on vacant properties, and tax policies that favor primary residences over investment properties. These measures help ensure that housing serves actual community needs rather than external investment objectives, creating more stable and sustainable real estate markets that can resist both excessive speculation and subsequent collapse. Survival Guide. Navigating Canada's real estate massacre requires strategic thinking, emotional discipline, and a clear understanding of your personal financial situation and risk tolerance. Whether you currently own property, plan to purchase, or invest in real estate, specific strategies can help protect your wealth and potentially capitalize on the current market disruption. For current property owners facing declining values, the most critical decision involves whether to sell immediately, hold long-term, or attempt to minimize ongoing costs while waiting for potential recovery. Homeowners whose properties have declined, but who can comfortably afford their mortgage payments, should carefully analyze their local market's fundamental economic drivers. If your city maintains diverse employment opportunities, reasonable population growth prospects, and property prices that remain connected to local incomes, holding may prove the optimal strategy despite temporary value declines. However, owners in markets showing the three deadly signs previously discussed should seriously consider strategic exit planning. This might involve selling at a loss to prevent larger future losses, particularly if you're approaching retirement, planning major life changes, or carrying significant debt beyond your mortgage. The key is recognizing that pride and emotional attachment to property can prevent rational financial decisions that protect your overall wealth. Underwater mortgage holders face particularly complex decisions. If you can afford payments and plan to remain in your current location for at least 5 years, continuing payments while building equity may prove optimal, especially if your interest rate is favorable. However, those facing job loss, relationship changes, or other life circumstances requiring relocation should consult with financial advisors and legal professionals about options including negotiated sales, mortgage modifications, or in extreme cases, strategic default considerations. Prospective buyers currently have unprecedented opportunities but must approach purchases with extreme caution and realistic expectations. The most important principle is buying based on your ability to afford payments using conservative assumptions about future income, interest rates, and property values. Avoid purchasing anything based on expected appreciation or assumptions about market recovery timing. Focus your search on markets demonstrating economic diversity, population stability, and reasonable price-to-income ratios. Properties in Ottawa, Calgary, Quebec City, and similar stable markets may offer better long-term value than apparent bargains in collapsing markets. Remember that falling prices don't automatically create good investments if the underlying reasons for decline persist. For investors, the current environment presents both exceptional opportunities and significant risks. Successful real estate investment during market corrections requires substantial cash reserves, deep local market knowledge, and the emotional fortitude to buy when others are panicking. Focus on markets with strong rental demand, reasonable municipal finances, and clear economic recovery pathways. Diversification becomes even more critical during unstable periods. Rather than concentrating investments in real estate, consider maintaining exposure to stocks, bonds, international markets, and alternative investments that provide protection against continued real estate decline. This is particularly important for Canadians whose wealth has become disproportionately concentrated in domestic real estate. Finally, maintain flexibility in your housing and investment strategies. Markets experiencing rapid change require adaptive thinking rather than rigid adherence to previous assumptions. Stay informed about local economic conditions, policy changes, and demographic trends that might affect your specific market, and be prepared to adjust your strategy as conditions evolve. The Canadian real estate massacre is not a distant threat or theoretical possibility. It is an ongoing crisis that demands immediate attention and decisive action from anyone with exposure to Canadian property markets. The evidence presented demonstrates that this is not a temporary correction, but a fundamental restructuring of real estate values that will permanently alter the financial landscape for millions of Canadians. The question facing every reader is not whether these changes will affect you, but how quickly you will adapt to the new reality and position yourself for whatever comes next. The time for passive observation has passed. Every day of inaction represents potential wealth, preservation opportunities lost, and risks that compound with time. If you own property in any of the 10 cities identified, or in markets showing similar warning signs, you must immediately assess your situation with professional help and develop a concrete action plan. This may involve difficult decisions about selling properties at losses, restructuring debts, or abandoning long-held assumptions about real estate as a guaranteed wealth-building strategy. For those considering purchases, the current environment offers generational buying opportunities, but only for those who approach the market with rigorous analysis, conservative assumptions, and sufficient financial reserves to weather continued volatility. The properties available at massive discounts today may represent exceptional value, but only if purchased in markets with genuine recovery potential and sustainable economic fundamentals. Investors and speculators who helped create the current crisis through reckless capital deployment must recognize that the easy money period has ended permanently. Future real estate investment success will require genuine expertise, local market knowledge, and strategies focused on cash flow generation rather than appreciation speculation. The markets that recover will reward patient, knowledgeable investors while continuing to punish those chasing quick profits. The broader implications extend beyond individual financial decisions to the fundamental structure of Canadian society. The communities experiencing real estate collapse need new economic development strategies, population retention programs, and innovative approaches to municipal finance that don't depend on ever-increasing property values. Citizens must demand leadership that addresses root causes rather than implementing policies that merely postpone inevitable corrections. Most importantly, Canadians must abandon the dangerous myth that real estate always recovers and always represents a safe investment. The current crisis demonstrates that property values can decline rapidly and remain depressed for extended periods, particularly in markets with weak economic fundamentals. Future financial planning must incorporate realistic assumptions about real estate performance and maintain diversification strategies that don't concentrate wealth in any single asset class. The knowledge and analysis provided here represents a significant advantage over the vast majority of Canadians who remain unaware of the crisis's scope and implications. Use this advantage wisely by taking concrete steps to protect your wealth, capitalize on opportunities, and prepare for continued market volatility. The real estate massacre has already begun, and its effects will reverberate through Canadian society for decades. Those who recognize the new reality and adapt quickly will preserve and potentially grow their wealth, while those who cling to outdated assumptions will continue losing money at an accelerating pace. The choice is yours, and the time to act is now.